Hello and welcome to Time for God from St. Peter's, Bexhill, where we start with creation. One day in the Garden of Eden, Eve called out to God, "Lord, I have a problem." What's the problem, Eve? "Lord, I know you created me and provided this beautiful garden and all these wonderful animals and that hilarious comic snake. But I'm just not happy." "Why is that, Eve?" asked God. "Well, I'm lonely and I'm sick to death of apples." "In that case, Eve, I shall create man for you." "What's man, Lord?" "Well, man will be a flawed creature. He'll lie, cheat and be vain. All in all, he'll give you quite a hard time. He will also be witless and revel in childish things like fighting and kicking a ball about a field. He won't be too smart, so he'll need your advice to think properly." "Sounds great," said Eve with an ironically raised eyebrow. "What's the catch?" "Well, you can have him on one condition." "What's that, Lord?" "As I said, he'll be proud, arrogant and self-admiring, so you'll have to let him believe that I made him first. It will be our little secret, you know, woman to woman." Creation stories often get quite a bad press, but the creation stories in the Bible, as we've seen there are two of them, are still relevant to us today. Of the two creation stories in Genesis, today we look at the second one. But first, I'd like to say that neither is meant to be what we might call science. Indeed, when the Bible was being written, there wasn't science as such. There was knowledge. Knowledge wasn't divided into physics, chemistry, maths, theology and so on. It was just knowledge. And people wouldn't have asked, "Did this happen?" when they heard a creation story. They would have asked, "What does this tell us about God?" That was what was important. After all, most people at the time had the idea that the world was chaos, completely out of control and utterly unpredictable. There was no order, no justice. Things just happened, usually at the whim of some very unpleasant god or other. Think about the Greek myths. The Babylonian gods were a whole lot worse. And then along comes the Bible. And the first surprising, revolutionary thing that the Bible does is say that creation has an order. If you look, you will see it. And that order comes from God. Creation is not chaos. It comes from the one Creator. Nowadays, many people want to put religion and science either in very different boxes or in conflict with each other. But there's no conflict between real science and true religion. Science is all about looking for order. And as a Christian, I'm looking for order as well. The two should go perfectly together. And I think the Bible says, look at creation and you will see order in the hand of God. The first creation story, with the coming of light and dark, land and water and so on, is clearly saying that if you look at creation, you will see a pattern. And that, to my mind, makes it, if anything, the beginning of science. Look for pattern, look for cause and effect, and find the reason. The second creation story, today's reading, is shorter and probably older than the first, and it is more concerned with the beginning of mankind, of humanity. It is looking at why we are here. And the answer is that we are here to be with God. Yes, the Bible was written in a culture that was very male-orientated, but that's not the Bible's fault. God breathes life into the man, and then when the man needs a companion, God does that clever thing with Adam's rib and makes the woman. But the Bible gets to complete equality, in the eyes of God, very quickly. "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh," says the man. As you read through the Bible, look out for times when equality is worked out and valued, and when inequality is criticised. You will find them. I think there's quite a childlike simplicity in both creation stories. It's almost like a picture of a child in a sand pit, perhaps mud pit is more like, creating a world with careful concentration, with joy and with overall vision of how things should be. God and an atheist were having an argument. "I will create life without you," said the atheist. "Go on," said God. "Let me see you try." And the atheist bent down and picked up a handful of dirt. "Just hold on there a minute," said God. "Go and make your own dirt." And did you notice how the story ends, shows an amazing cooperation between God and us? It shows God and humanity working together, practically to look after the garden, and intellectually to give names to everything. I love it. And so we come to Jesus, and we see something of this same intimacy in our second reading this morning as well, from Luke 8. We are with the disciples by the Sea of Galilee. One day Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side of the lake." So they got into a boat and set out. As they sailed, he fell asleep. A squall came down on the lake, so that the boat was being swamped, and they were in great danger. The disciples went and woke him, saying, "Master, Master, we're going to drown." He got up and rebuked the wind and the raging waters. The storm subsided, and all was calm. "Where is your faith?" he asked the disciples. In fear and amazement, they asked one another, "Who is this? He commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him." It only occurred to me when I came to this passage again that Jesus is the boss, but he doesn't tell the disciples what to do. He suggests. "Let us go over to the other side of the lake," he says. And so they get into a boat. Remember, several of the disciples are fishermen. And Jesus is so comfortable, so secure with his friends that he settles down and goes to sleep. We really shouldn't be surprised at what happens next, because the creation stories set the scene for what is to come. But we're not in Genesis anymore, and things have changed. The disciples don't have the closeness to God we saw in the beginning, the closeness they need when the storm comes up and threatens to sink the boat. Instead, they panic. "Master, Master," they say, "we're going to drown." And Jesus wakes up, gets up, and rebuked the wind and the raging waters. Notice the language. Notice how Jesus rebukes the storm. He simply tells it off. He tells the wind and the water to, shut up, calm down. And they do. I think we are meant to see a link back to creation. When God speaks and things happen. God speaks and creation comes into being. Now Jesus speaks and creation responds. The disciples sort of notice this link. "Who is this?" they say. "He commands even the winds and the water. They obey him." And Jesus says to his disciples, "Where is your faith?" Where indeed? Don't they realize who Jesus is, who is in the boat with them? Well, no, they don't. Not fully. Not yet. And if we are honest, we can see where they are coming from. It's all very well me saying trust God and everything will be all right, which is sort of what I'm doing. In fact, we know that everything will not be all right. Bad things happen to good people. Good people, good Christians, are persecuted, have accidents, get ill, suffer. We all die. Life is not fair. Surely we are allowed to panic a bit at times. Well, yes, we are. After all, we're only human. And let's go back to what Jesus says. You might like to think about the different ways you can ask the question, where is your faith? Is Jesus rebuking them or not? Think about it. Maybe he is criticizing a little, or maybe he is laughing at them, just a little. However he says it, What Jesus does is draw them into a deeper, securer knowledge of God, the knowledge that God is with them, in such a way that they are safe even when threatened with sinking under the worst possible storm. And bigger storms are on the way, of course, for Jesus on the cross and the disciples through the rest of their lives. We all face storms in our lives at different times. We cannot stop storms coming, but we can choose how we react to them. Think of someone you know who has weathered a storm, and perhaps how their faith has led them through. Through all the storms we face, we can let faith change, transform our reaction. Perhaps that is what matters. Perhaps when we live in harmony with the God who created us, there can indeed be calmness, the peace that the world cannot give. Perhaps this is what knowing Jesus is all about. That peace is not the absence of storms, but the presence of God. And the amazing thing is that this peace is completely free. The Bible, with all its amazing stories of creation and recreation, is given to us, imperfect you and me, as the story of God's love. And it is given so that we can know God a little bit better too. What the disciples are beginning to understand is the amazing link between our extraordinary friend and teacher, Jesus, and the God of all creation, who was and is to come. Amen.